2024 has been a heck of a year in Syracuse sports, and we're only halfway through it. So a good time to take a step back and see what's happened so far this year. What are the most interesting stories? What are the biggest stories? What are the things that stand out to you in Syracuse sports as we are halfway through 2024? Now, there's a lot to anticipate. Certainly Fran Brown taking over the football program and seeing how he actually coaches. Adrian Autry's second season in basketball beginning, the continuing recruitment for both of those programs. There's a big fish, if you will, in the recruiting pond that Syracuse basketball wants to land, the son of a former national champion at Syracuse. Things we know that we can see coming down the road, but then there's always the things no one sees coming, right? So 2024 still has plenty to bring us. But today, we're going to focus on what we already know. So I brought in Chris Carlson and Emily Leiker, my friends, my colleagues from syracuse.com, and we kind of went around the horn to give you our three most interesting stories so far this year and one prediction for the second half of 2024. You know who else gave us their predictions? Our Syracuse Sports Insiders, who, as always, brought the noise. Can't wait to react to what you guys think have been the biggest stories of the year so far a little later in the podcast. Become a Syracuse Sports Insider today. Just text the word orange to 315-847-3895. That's 315-847-3895. It's free for 2 weeks, just $3.99 a month after that. And what you get by being a Syracuse Sports Insider is daily text from me. Any breaking news that we have, I'm going to send it to you first. Any inside opinions, things I'm thinking about, you guys are going to get it first. Top 5 Fridays. We make a top 5 list every Friday. Get your reaction to that. That's been a ton of fun. And just direct text message access to me. Your thoughts, your opinions, your questions, things you want heard on this podcast, guests you want to see on this podcast. And of course, as we're going to do a little later, your opinions expressed on this podcast. So thanks for being a Syracuse Sports Insider. Something new and fun we're doing on the pod, and want to encourage you to do this. Are you a musician? Are you in a band? Do you just make music yourself? Send it to me. Let me highlight it for you here on this podcast. We're making music a bigger part of the Syracuse Sports Podcast. Now, I want to be clear about this. We're looking for original music. Yet we can't play the Rolling Stones. We can't play Springsteen. We can't play Beyonce on this show, right? That's commercial recorded music. We can't play that. We don't have the rights to that. But I can play your music. If you're in a band, if you've got music and you want me to highlight it on this show, send it to me, okay? All the information is in the show notes on how you can get in touch with me. We featured Tanner Carter in our last podcast. Today, we're going to feature a great song from a band called The Moms. It's the Soup song. Right in my wheelhouse type of music that I listen to. So you're going to hear a little clip of that coming up, and then the song in its entirety at the end of the podcast. And I'm looking forward to getting your music more involved with this show. So please, all the info in the show notes, send me your music, and can't wait to highlight it in future episodes of Syracuse Sports. Let's get to it. Chris Carlson, Emily Leiker, and I. The biggest stories of the year so far.
Eat soup and feel good, and it worked much better than I thought it would. Paint a picture and paint it brown, sniffing glue in a one-horse town.
So I hate it when local newscasts do this. They do it at the beginning of every month. Can you believe it's July already? It's like, yeah, that's the passage of time, right? But it is noteworthy that we are halfway through 2024. There's a lot that's happened. We're anticipating certainly a lot to come here. So I thought it'd be fun to gather Emily Leiker and Chris Carlson from syracuse.com. And we are going to pick our three most interesting stories, three favorite stories, three biggest stories, however you want to frame it. Just three stories that stand out to us so far. And the only rules here are it has to be in this calendar year, 2024. When I pitched this to our Syracuse Sports Insiders, I love you guys, but a lot of the stuff you said happened last year, right? Because it's carried over into 2024. I mean, Fran Brown is the primary answer there. But with us, the rules are this year And this is not a draft, so answers can repeat just for those listening and watching. And we're going to do one prediction as well for the second half of the season. So let us begin. Ladies first. Emily, I'm going to turn to you for your first story.
That's so much pressure because, like I told you guys, I picked like 5 and was going to be like, okay, I'll shuffle through and we'll get some different mix. But I guess I can pick whatever I want. I'll say about all my picks, I tried to pick things that are like, I think, representative of larger topics and concepts that have kind of been interesting this whole year. And so I will start literally at the very tippy top of the year, right after the stroke of midnight into 2024. And I will go with Deuce Chestnut's return to Syracuse football.
Wow. Good one.
I mean, like the transfer portal, right? Like is just like the constant talking point in all of college sports now. And obviously we see a lot of movement. We see kids transfer schools multiple times, but it is still pretty rare for a kid to leave a school and then come back to that school a year later. And so I think, especially with the caliber of player Deuce was when he was here for his first 2 seasons. I mean, he was a freshman All-American. He really popped and was kind of the opposite to Garrett Williams when Garrett Williams was here. I mean, he was a huge get even after a down year at LSU to have him return. And, you know, when I tie it to the big picture stuff, I mean, besides just the transfer portal, like he's a New Jersey guy. He's a guy from Camden. Like Fran getting him was just another like example of how deeply his ties in New Jersey run and how strong his relationships with people are there. And I don't know, like I thought that was really interesting that he came back, and then you get in the spring, we find out Fran has moved his position, which is really interesting as well. And we'll obviously see how that works out. But that was certainly one that was kind of a bang to kick off the start of the year.
Great choice, and I think it represents what a lot of people are thinking with Fran Brown and all the transfers coming in. But he has a unique aspect, as you put it, Emily, that he went somewhere else, came back, and Uncle Brent's usually not up that late on New Year's Eve, not going to lie, but I just happened to be up, and it's like the three of us have kind of joked in group chats and everything, just like the frequency at which the transfers were coming and now the recruits are coming, and we're always on standby, one of us to pop in and write the story. I'm like, oh my God, it's midnight on New Year's Eve, and I got to go write Deuce Chestnut coming to Syracuse. But it was great and very creative and very great representation of a big story at Syracuse. Chris, I turn to you for your first choice.
You guys are going to hate me for this one. But on May 24th, the NCAA and the power conferences agreed to the potential settlement in the NCAA versus House class action lawsuit. The ACC, obviously one of the 4 conferences that helped, create the terms. And, it's just going to dictate everything about Syracuse athletics that we see for the next, 10 years. It's going to, right, we're going to be talking about various ways that Syracuse is trying to make revenue and commercials on the field and recruiting against Rutgers, which, talking to Brian Doan, right? Syracuse is doing really well under Fran, number 31 in the country in 2025. Rutgers is at number 16. And part of the reason Brian Doan from 247 Sports thought that's the case is every athlete who's going to the SEC, who's picking an SEC or a Big Ten school, knows that if revenue sharing comes, like they are going to get the maximum amount of money that is permissible. All the SEC and the Big Ten schools are going to give money to athletes as much as they can, and they're going to be able to. I think Syracuse will be able to. I think Syracuse will, but we have heard nothing from their leadership on what their plans are if the settlement goes through. So it's just, right, it's part of that whole domino in terms of shaping college sports, but it really is going to be the motivation behind, I think, everything we see for the rest of the year.
Emily, something you said just this week, you were at an event, the coaches caravan, as you've got Syracuse coaches, Fran Brown, Felicia Leggett-Jack, Adrian Autry, that are kind of doing a little New York State tour here, and their first stop was in Rochester. And to hear John Wildhack, the athletic director at Syracuse, openly talk to this crowd about money that Kyle McCord turned down at Nebraska to come to Syracuse, it still hits me when we talk about this. Is not normal to me yet, as much as it's a big part of the conversation. An athletic director openly talking about essentially a free agent quarterback that Syracuse brought in through the portal. And oh, by the way, we paid him more, or he turned down whatever the money was at Nebraska. That still fascinates me.
Right. Well, it's interesting because like what John was saying, like John's promoting the NIL. He was specifically promoting SU football NIL, which we probably could have included as a story for this year, though technically they formed last year and we didn't find out really until this year. It's kind of like a mix match. That's where some of this gets a little confusing. But Wildhack was promoting that along with the other NIL collectives. But then he's telling you that they only offered McCord, like he's telling this crowd that they only offered McCord or could only offer McCord half of what. Now, I don't know. Maybe they could have gone higher and he just agreed. It's a little weird. But like they're saying they offered, like McCord's getting less than he could have at Nebraska. So I think it also just a reminder too that while we're in the NIL era, and money is still not necessarily the most important thing to these kids and these athletes. And like, while it certainly weighs in on people's decisions and all of that, like things like relationships, like the fact that Fran and Kyle have known each other since Kyle was a kid, like that is still important. Like that is worth the other $500,000 or whatever we want to say that Syracuse, that's the difference between Syracuse and Nebraska's NIL offers to Kyle.
Now, on that note, my first choice is Eddie Lampkin. And there's a number of branches you can pursue here in the Eddie Lampkin story. Syracuse lost 6 transfers to the portal, which just seems to be normal these days, and they replaced them with other players. Eddie Lampkin was one of the first to sign on. Eddie Lampkin was a desired player at the position that Syracuse needed, and it seemed to be a normal transaction. Syracuse had X amount of NIL dollars to offer. They had a position for him. They certainly needed a 6'11", 275-pound center to come in and be somebody that Syracuse can run their offense through, right? Simple. Well, it's not so simple because eventually Eddie wipes his Instagram and there's about a week and a half of what's going on. He's not talking to anybody. He's not talking to the coaching staff. Mike Waters and I report out a story about how Eddie essentially comes back to Syracuse to essentially renegotiate the terms of his deal or lock down the terms of his deal. There were still other schools pursuing him, which can happen in the portal, right? These are essentially verbal agreements until you sign and show up and are at an actual, and you're enrolled at Syracuse, you're at an actual workout. Like there's still schools knocking on the door. And the fact that, kind of like we were talking about the Wildhack, the financial terms in this case mattered. And then all of a sudden there's, smiley Instagram stories and videos, all good. He's on Marshall Street shopping and I'm all in. And the whole process of that to me was just a fascinating story. And then by no fault of his own, a little while later, Eddie steps into the 44 debate at Syracuse, which is typically a football conversation, but Derek Coleman not thrilled with the fact that Eddie's going to wear the 44 in basketball, as he expressed on social media. So it's July 10th. This guy hasn't played a second for Syracuse basketball and has already been a big topic of conversation for sure. So, Emily, I turn to you for your second story. I don't know if I swiped one from you guys there. If he was
no, not yet. I'm safe still. My second one that I'm going to go with is the turnaround at the face-off X for Syracuse men's lacrosse. I am someone who does like to think about what-if scenarios, for better or worse. Brent, we've talked about a few on this pod before about football and stuff, but when you look at what the men's lacrosse team was able to do this year, getting all the way to the quarterfinals of the NCAA tournament, after a year last year where things were really rough at some points, it all hinges on Gary Gate having found Mason Cone and so Johnny Mullen and those guys being able to handle the face-off X. Because if that doesn't happen, Syracuse certainly doesn't make it that far in the tournament. Then you start thinking about the ripple effects of, okay, are some of these big stars, particularly on the attack, going to leave because they're not getting anywhere without a face-off X? And so that's one of those storylines that I just think there are so many, it's just one position on the team, but has such a ripple effect to like the entire team's success this season. And I think was so interesting because it was so stark. Like it was like watching, I mean, granted, you were watching two different people. They had different face-off guys last year, but it was like night and day. Like even from like game one, you and I were like, oh my God, the face-off X is completely different this year. Like they're actually winning things here and like getting things to happen. And so I think the fact that Gary was able to find Mason in the transfer portal, which obviously Mason himself is such an interesting story because he wasn't a lacrosse guy, really. I mean, he played lacrosse, but wasn't primarily a lacrosse guy in the way so many Syracuse players are. And then for that to go so successfully, like it sets them up for like a great 2025. They keep Johnny Mullen. Cone will move on, I believe. I think he was out of eligibility. But yeah, I mean, they're set up for a great year because they pretty much retained their whole team at this point.
And just to add to that, Emily, Cone, you mentioned, was primarily a hockey player, just kind of played lacrosse on the side, but got better and better at it, particularly at such a specialist position. So you have the fifth-year senior, tutoring the freshmen. And as the season went along, Johnny Mullen got better. You could kind of see them literally in real time passing the torch to the young guy to step in there. And faceoffs have been such a major issue for Syracuse lacrosse in the past couple of years. To see that issue resolved right before our very eyes in the way and the manner it was pretty fascinating. Over to Chris for his second story.
All right, so I'm sort of stealing Emily's first one a little bit in Deuce, but I'm going a little bit bigger. But I'm taking just the whole wide scale roster flip that Fran Brown has done sort of in his first period of time, as Syracuse football coach. And, I would have liked to take Kyle, but that happened, the previous year. So I'm going to sneak it. Yeah, I'm going to sneak him in this way. I'm going to sneak him in by 28 transfers out, 18 transfers in. The number 9 transfer class in the country as ranked by On3, which tries to measure improvement rather than simple quality. But, put Syracuse in a group that includes Louisville, Colorado, Mississippi, Texas, Oregon, Florida State, NC State, Missouri. Those are the only schools that did it better. And right, there's some powerhouses. There's some very buzzy schools. And Fran Brown has Syracuse sort of among those in his first season. And sort of, right, it set the tone that Syracuse is going to have a high standard and they're going to play to win. And, if you can't help that happen, like, you got to go, which is, it's a harsh reality, but it's how Power 5 football works. It's how it's played in the SEC. If you're not helping the program, we hope you have a nice career at a smaller school, but you can't stay here. And that, that's the way it's going to be around for now. So
you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I counted on you guys to come up with the football stuff. I mean, I wrote it down, but I knew between the three of us we'd have some football stuff. So
I have a comment about this.
Yeah,
I just wanted to add like some more context since the coaches caravan happened this week and some of the transfer portal stuff was brought up. And I think this ties to like the roster change of it all. One interesting thing that I think Fran has said on multiple occasions, and he reiterated on Tuesday night, is that like the culture he's trying to build, the dark culture, right? Like detailed, accountability, relentless, tough. I've got it memorized now after 7 months. Like requires a lot of buy-in. And like you can be like, oh, any football culture requires a lot of buy-in. But I think what's to some degree unique about Fran, obviously Dabo Swinney doesn't use the transfer portal very much, if at all, either. But Fran has said like he doesn't want to use the transfer portal as like a one and done type situation unless there's an exceptional circumstance, right? So like Kyle McCord's an exceptional circumstance. Fidel Diggs is an exceptional circumstance. Outside of that, he wants to focus a lot on the high schoolers, which we've seen, and is part of that roster flip. And part of that roster flip that's going to be ongoing into next year. They're at 28, class of 2025 verbal commits now. So wants to focus on those. And then the transfers that maybe have like 2 to 3 years of eligibility, which they certainly picked up a few of those guys in this class as well. Yazid Haynes is the big one that comes to mind. He was just a freshman last year and is going to have 3 years of eligibility at least at Syracuse. And so it's like interesting and it's always very purposeful when you flip a roster, right? But I think it's so interesting and how like Fran has been so upfront kind of about how he's doing it. The other thing he said last night that I thought was really striking, but just like kind of didn't fit in like a written story, or you couldn't build a written story around, was like, he was like, if I hear a guy talking about, I'm maybe thinking about going in the transfer portal, I'm getting them in my office and I'm telling them to leave immediately, because I don't need that info. Like, I don't need that attitude disseminating throughout the locker room and throughout my team and causing other guys to be like, should I leave? Blah, 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 blah. It like affects buy-in. And like, you might be like, oh, that's harsh. But I mean, what, you don't want guys who are on your team that are thinking that they don't want to be here. And, you know, he obviously doesn't name names, but calls to mind the Damian Alford circumstance, which was almost one of my picks for this, where just kind of all of a sudden, like, it was like Damian Alford's been dismissed from the team, and comes out that, oh, he had a conversation, was considering transferring, did transfer. But yeah.
And you know what it is, Emily? It's consistent, because what have we heard over and over again, mostly from recruits and commits, but from a lot of people, how direct Fran Brown is. He's real, right? So that's a real attitude right there. If you're thinking about going in the portal, don't think about it. There's the door. Okay,
don't say it. don't say it. Don't speak it.
I'm not going to do it. Second story for me. Emily, you had a lacrosse story. I had a lacrosse story as well. The Syracuse-Cornell game this year. And everything that came from that Syracuse-Cornell game. First of all, it was one of the more fascinating sporting events I've covered in the last decade. Syracuse absolutely put the pedal to the metal, was throttling this team early. It's a rainy night down in Ithaca, and it just looks like Syracuse is going to run them off the field. And then all of a sudden, there's a little interaction on the sideline. Now, I want to paint a picture for you guys. If you've never been in the Cornell press box, I'm going to be kind here. It's old school, and it's very far away from the field. So picture you're on the second floor of a 3-floor structure. It is at least 300 yards away from the field. There are no monitors in this building, so I regretted for the first time in a very long time not bringing my binoculars to a sporting event, which we actually used to do, even at the Dome, to get a close look at things that were going down on the field, right? So there's this little interaction on the sideline, and none of us can figure out what's going on. And then all of a sudden, we see Pat March, Syracuse offensive coordinator, walking away. Okay, I've never seen a lacrosse coach ejected from a game, but we saw it, right? So that dynamic happens. I'm texting people that I know are in the stands to try to tell me what's going on over there, because we don't know. Like, we're far away. I didn't have time to go down the elevator, run over there, and see what was happening. So this is all happening in real time. We're trying to figure out what he did to get thrown out of the game. Meanwhile, Cornell storms back. At the end of the game, Syracuse does tie it to send it to overtime. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on with Pat March. Meanwhile, there's this incredible lacrosse game and comeback going on. Syracuse does eventually lose in overtime. And Emily, as you know, they lost a lot of games in overtime this year. It's just one of those things that really could make this list if we wanted to, right? So just the fallout of the ejection in the game itself and how wild the game was and the atmosphere come to turn out that Gary Gate had gone to the officials before the game to ask for the particular official who threw Pat March out of the game to not officiate the game because he's a Cornell employee. Wild stuff all around here, and it just goes to show you that as big as this sport has grown, there's still stories like this that come up. They asked for this ref to be removed, and they're basically like, well, we can't. We don't have time to go find another official to come to this game. It sounds like a high school story, right? But wild night in Ithaca for sure. It all turned out for Syracuse. They did make the tournament and, did take a big step forward as a program, but it felt that night that things were teetering completely the other way. And Pat March had to serve a 1-game suspension after that, which is standard for an ejection. But so many things I saw happen in one night. If you just talked about the lacrosse game itself, it almost would qualify for this list, but all the other circumstances of it were one of the more unique events and the aftermath that I think I've ever covered. We're all 2 in here, so Emily is going to lead us off with number 3.
My final one. I'm going to mention her. Hopefully I'm stealing from one of you guys. I hope someone else had this on their list. But Dyaisha Fair becoming number 3 on the NCAA's all-time scoring list in a year that has just been crazy for women's basketball at the NCAA level, at the WNBA level. Like, there's like Dyaisha Fair had is history. Like, and that was just such a big moment. And I mean, like, the women's basketball team as a whole did fairly well this season, and I think they have such a dedicated fan base here. But Dyaisha Fair, I mean, obviously gets drafted by the Aces, doesn't end up staying with the team, but she's the only player in the 3 big revenue sports to get drafted this year, because there was no men's basketball draftees and there were no football draftees. So she's the only one to hold that mantle for the year. There were some men's lacrosse. There was one men's lacrosse draftee, but that's kind of different. And now she's going to go play internationally, which obviously is a pretty common route for WNBA players, for better or worse, or for women's basketball players, better or worse. But I mean, you can't talk about both the 2023-24 school year, but also 2024 calendar year thus far without talking about Dyaisha's accomplishments and what she was able to do this season with Syracuse basketball and Felicia Legette-Jack.
Great choice. And Chris, you wrote about Dyaisha a lot and how tough it would be for her to stick in the WNBA, as good of a player as she was. And unfortunately, we did see that play out, that she was on the Las Vegas Aces briefly. I think she only got like 2 minutes of time in one game, and then she was cut, I think, the next day. And it just goes to show you how tough it is to crack into that league. And now she's heading for Israel to play in the fall.
They are thankfully expanding. So there will be a few more landing spots. But yeah, you think your pick number, I think it was 16 overall, right? In any other sport, you're like safe. Like, you're good. But with so few teams, and we all know, right? In the NBA, if you get picked in the second round, there's no guarantee. But there's no G League, right? There's smaller rosters. It's just really, really hard to stick. But boy, she was fun to watch. She gave us the most memorable highlights to me from games, like the way she played in the fourth quarter. The way you want a star player to like take over in those clutch moments was pretty awesome.
All right, your third story, Chris.
I hate that I am picking a verbal commitment because we all know what they mean.
Oh boy, Chris.
We'll see how this ages. But April 18th, Isaiah Williams committed to the Syracuse football program. He's currently the number 41 player overall in the class of 2026. We're obviously a long, long way from signing day, and the Florida programs are going to go hard after Isaiah before that day comes. But like, that is the dream that Fran Brown has given Syracuse in his first 7 months, that a player like that would commit and be interested in this school. Like, I mean, I don't know which of Paul Pasqualoni's recruits would have been number 41 in the country. Like, recruiting rankings didn't exist back then. I don't know which of his guys sort of were that good. But that is a level that we certainly haven't seen since then in terms of like a high-level high school recruit being interested in Syracuse. He's one of 2 guys in 2026 that's already committed. Again, not worth anything right now, but like, that is the dream. That they have created a dream for Syracuse football fans, and some much-needed optimism in that program.
That's a good way of putting it. That it's like that it's delivering on the dream, because even if he doesn't commit, even if neither of the 2 verbal commits they have for that class right now commit, like, in the past 6 years, like, Syracuse wouldn't have even been in the conversation.
That could never would have considered coming here, right?
Right. So it is, and it's like, being in the conversation now means that if they create success on the field over the next couple of years and can keep this hype up, those guys will eventually be sticking with Syracuse for 18 months through their commitment or whatever. And these 2 could. We don't know, but like you said, it's a long road to get there. So
yeah, well, as Brent Eddie Lampkin choice, they changed their mind. He changed his mind, or almost changed his mind, over the course of a couple weeks. These kids have a couple years, so hang in there.
Ooh, I got some choices here for number 3. We've talked a lot of stories. We've talked about a couple of games, and I know we talked about one dismissal, but I'm going to pick another dismissal here. Now, we'll go over some ones that did not get selected here in a minute, basketball-wise. And I don't think this ended up hurting the team as much as maybe you thought something like this could. But I'm going to put the Benny Williams dismissal on here. Now, Benny Williams had some troubles at Syracuse, had some other things happen. They were very patient with him through his entire Syracuse career. But this was a spot that a new head coach was put on, right? Adrian Autry is trying to mold this program in his image. And it got to the point where you had to essentially eject, and they like to say their family, and sometimes I believe it, sometimes I don't, but these guys spend every day together and they grow close no matter what their differences are. That's got to be a really hard thing to do for a head coach of a basketball program to go to a kid and say, you're not wanted here anymore. And then on the other side of your mouth say, we love you, we support you, all those things, but we can't do this anymore. We have to dismiss you from this program, right? That is still something to me that in this day and age is fascinating, that it got to that point. After that, Chris, I'll turn to you for this. You could see that Autry was finally getting his grip on the program. His press conference after the Wake Forest game, where he finally kind of came out of his shell a little bit. And in that moment is when I think Adrian Autry became the head coach of this basketball team. That could not be an easy thing to do. It shook up the locker room for sure. While necessary, based on everything that we knew and certainly some things that maybe we don't and only heard about, to just flat out dismiss a kid from the team and see the aftermath of that, to me, is still something that was fascinating to me. And they did land on their feet. Like, that didn't, completely sink the season. They didn't make the tournament ultimately, but I think they recovered from that better than maybe most thought they would.
Yeah, one of the really interesting. I haven't heard Adrian talk too much about it, but one of the biggest challenges he had to face as a first-year coach was, for years he had been the shoulder for these guys to cry on and to coddle, not coddle.
Yeah, good cop. He's the good cop. Yeah,
for sure. For years, through their recruitment, through their time under Jim Boeheim, he is the sort of the soft touch on the coaching staff, and then he has to go to the bad cop. And how do you flip that switch? How does he flip that switch? How does he flip that switch on kids, in terms of their relationship? That had to be a really, really difficult thing for you to do, for him to do and deal with all season. I'm sure, I'm sure that wasn't the only example of it. But yeah, what a sort of fascinating psychological experiment that had to be.
Before we get to our prediction, let's go to the kind of others receiving votes category here. Here's a few that did not get mentioned, and then you guys can throw some out there that I don't mention. In no particular order, by the way. Syracuse basketball beats number 7 North Carolina at the Dome. The Quadir Copeland buzzer beater to beat Miami at the Dome. There were a couple of great moments at the Dome this year, basketball-wise. Adrian Autry to get to 20 wins, technically, in 2024, despite the fact that they did not make the tournament. And let's not forget that something that didn't get mentioned, Syracuse bows out of the NIT, which has kind of become normal, honestly. More schools are doing that, but that was still notable that Syracuse did not do that. Jim Boeheim Day at the Dome this year, and the banner going up and the celebration there. Jerry McNamara takes the job at Siena. So a lot of basketball things there. The muddy tent situation at the Syracuse Stony Brook women's lacrosse NCAA tournament game. The women's lacrosse team, once again, can't get over the hump, cannot beat Boston College, and just has a losing streak against that team that's getting longer and longer, and shining a spotlight on that program as to just why they can't get over that hump. I think that's everything on my list. Anything that we didn't get mentioned that you guys have?
I had the Syracuse women's lacrosse not being able to get over Boston College again. That was probably my big one. I do think technically I'm confirming now. Technically, Jeff Nixon was not announced as Syracuse's offensive coordinator until January 5th. So again,
that
if
counts.
we want to sneak a little, even though pretty much everyone knew that was happening before January 5th.
That's true.
There was some stuff that had to shake out in terms of, I think, the end of his NFL season with the Giants. But yeah, I think we hit some of the biggest ones, like especially keeping to the first 6 months of this year and not bleeding into December, because to be fair, like the end of November and December feel like this year because it was a brand new era for football.
All right, Emily, we're going to stay with you. One prediction. We've got half a year to go, guys. A lot can happen. Give me one prediction on something that's going to happen in the days and months to come in 2024.
Yeah, I joked yesterday that when we brought up this idea, that mine was going to be that they're going to win. Football is going to win multiple games in November. I won't go with that, but so I'll skew in like the maybe too bold direction. I think I'm like scared to even say it, but I think Syracuse might get College Game Day this year.
Oh, baby, that's a big one.
Which week?
I just think
Which week?
I don't know. I need to
think I know.
my gut says the Virginia Tech week, but that's pretty late in the season. So they would still have to be like pretty well, like they'd have to have a good record at that point, which they should, but there's like some interesting ones before that. That would be my gut, because the only other one, like you could maybe say like, do they want to come early in the season? Georgia Tech, obviously, the interesting storyline there is Georgia Tech beat Syracuse to end Dino Babers' career here last year. Like, that's an
probably
early
doesn't
season
resonate
game.
nationally, probably right on the
Right, I
game
know,
day
but
level.
it's like
I hate to say it, but the date that probably makes sense is when they go to NC State. College
but
game day.
that's at NC State, so that's
what I mean.
Count.
That's that. I know it sucks, but they wouldn't come here
Come to
in that
Syracuse.
case. Yeah.
But
Both
I
of
mean,
those,
like,
NC State's going to be good. Like at that point, like if
Yeah.
Syracuse does what people think, that is like a stay in the playoff picture type of game potentially for both of those.
Which
teams.
which
maybe
everybody
I
here would
will
hate.
amend it
Yeah.
to, like, they will be in a game day matchup this year, and we can say
That's good.
maybe NC State. But like, I just think like the hype around Fran Brown, like there is growing national hype there, and if they can, there's just like a lot of nationally like you have like Elijah Robinson, who was at Texas A&M. Like you have known faces in this program now, and there is some interest. But I do think you would have to be a little into the season, because you guys are right. Like there has to be, like you can't do it in week 2 when Syracuse is like 1-0 against Ohio. Like, but I don't know.
Yeah, the
That's
national
my
buzz
bold.
is still pretty minimal. Like they need to win. They need to.
Right.
They need to. For national folks to really care, right? We've seen the
And that's why
preseason
that
predictions. They're not great.
That's why
What?
that Virginia Tech game could be good, because that's 2 months into the season. If they're that would be like probably like 7-1, 6-2 at that point, and Virginia Tech's anywhere around the same, which I think Virginia Tech's going to be really good this year.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's like a matchup where you could reasonably see it happening, I think.
All right, I like that one, Chris.
My
what do you
bold
got?
one.
That's a good one. That's bolder. That's bolder than.
Doesn't have to be bold, by
That's
the way.
bolder
but
than I'm going.
like
I know, but I like bold. Bold's nice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go. I think this will be on our list next year. We're gonna have an Anthony family reunion. Kai and Anthony is coming to Syracuse. We're gonna be seeing Carmelo around a lot more, and he's gonna join Adrian Autry's program, and that'll be a pretty cool storyline. And we'll get to follow another Anthony career, which I'll look forward to. Carmelo was. I went to school when Carmelo went to school, and he was as good to cover as a high-profile freshman could be in terms of his demeanor and how he handled himself around reporters. He was, a joy. And hopefully we get around 2.
All right, you may qualify this as bold. We shall see. You know what, guys? The home opener, Syracuse football against Ohio, is going to sell out.
You've said this before.
And the Georgia
Pick a
Tech
different
game is
one.
going to sell out. and the Stanford game's going to sell out. Now, where I may run into some trouble here is that Holy Cross game. I don't know if that's going to sell out.
The Holy Cross game isn't going to sell out.
Okay, so it doesn't sound bold. The bold prediction is every home game sells out.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
That's the bold prediction. But then I'm like, Holy Cross is not selling out. It's just not. Even if they start 3-0 and people are fired up, like I just don't see that happening. So I'm going to say every home game except Holy Cross is going to sell out. Okay, so we're not quite bold there, but we're in the middle of that, considering what we've seen attendance-wise in recent years, right? The fact that 5 out of 6 home games would sell out, and UConn late in the year, that could be tricky as well. But you end with Miami, what a banger! Even with the students out of town, I still think that game sells out. Let's keep in mind there's 8,000 less seats in the Dome. I love you guys, okay? Our listeners, our viewers, our Syracuse Sports Insiders, but I've been very consistent in this opinion because I've lived here my whole life. This is a fair weather sports town. People get caught up in the hype of things, and there is a contingent, I call them the fair weather 10,000, of people that just only go to games when there's a buzz, then there's a feel, and there's like, oh man, I got to be there. I think this year is going to bring a lot of them back. I think there's going to be so much conversation about Fran Brown, this football program, and they got to back it up on the field, of course, that there's just going to be people that are going to say, I got to see it. I got to be there, right? So every home game except Holy Cross sells out.
Well, and they're going to have, and I'm going to use this to throw in a bonus prediction too. They're going to have probably like hundreds of recruits at every game, it feels like. I mean, if the spring game was any indication, like there was so many kids there and every practice that we saw this spring. So those tickets or those butts and seats count as well. But my bonus prediction I'll throw in, that's a much softer one, is I think Syracuse will sign a top 25 recruiting class this fall. They're about 10 off from that right now. They land a 4-star or 2, which I do think like the higher ranked recruits are sometimes hold out until signing day to commit and join classes and stuff like that. If they add a couple 4-stars to the class, I think they'd easily slip into 25 with what they have right now.
That is bold though, because the average is down in the 40s. You know, if you look at the average recruit ranking, like they do have some room to make up, but a couple 4-stars will do it.
Right.
That brings to mind my favorite moment of 2024 in terms of working with you guys is going to that Saturday practice, and the door to the football indoor practice facility was wide open for about, I wish I clocked it. I wish I timed it, but it was at least 9 minutes of people just streaming into the Ensley Center. And
insane.
The recruits and the families, unlike I have ever seen at any Syracuse football practice. And then by the end of spring, like it was normal that we would, not that crowd, that was the biggest one, but there was just so many people at spring practice because Fran Brown literally opened the doors and said, let's change this thing around. And as you guys mentioned, with the transfers and the recruiting classes, and to this moment, it continues, the turnover of Syracuse football. Guys, great job. Great predictions. Great look back on the stories. I'm sure we missed one or two, so let us know in the comments. Syracuse Sports Insiders, let us know if there's a story we glossed over here, but I think we hit a lot of the big ones here, and appreciate you guys. We'll do this again soon. You've heard from Emily, Chris, and I on the stories of the year so far in 2024. Now we hear from our Syracuse Sports Insiders, who certainly had thoughts on this very subject. Let's start with Mikey V, who says, Dyaisha Fair becoming the 3rd all-time leading scorer in Syracuse history, easily takes it. Hate to say it, but Malik Brown to Duke. The home win over North Carolina. A lot of basketball stories in there. In lacrosse, he notes the blowout of Duke. Some huge blown leads as well, including against Cornell, and also notes that women's lacrosse couldn't quite get by Boston College and losing 2 big recruits, including the #1 player in the country, Alexis Spolina. Frankie Sarancino, good to see our guy Frankie, who says Fran Brown becoming the new head football coach. Technically last year, but get what you're saying. Syracuse men missing the tournament yet again, and what that means for next year, and Gary Gate continuing to build back the men's lacrosse program into a championship contender. From Michael W., Also notes Dyaisha Fair and how important she was to Syracuse women's basketball in the future. How did Syracuse land Kyle McCord and Fidel Diggs? That was technically 2023, right? Yeah, but the conversation of NIL spills over into 2024, as Michael notes here. How much has NIL changed for Syracuse in 2024 versus the past? Well, people are more aware of it. People are more committed to it. Syracuse football NIL, in addition to Orange United, in addition to athletes who care, eventually this is probably all going to come under the umbrella of Syracuse University. As Chris noted, the NCAA settlement and how things are kind of shifting a certain way. But for now, NIL, a little more prominent, local businesses, some big boosters, well aware that, to quote the great Tom Cruise line, show me the money. Got to do it, right? From Bruce D, who says Fran Brown on the recruiting barrage, but can he coach too? I think so. What the hell is going on with college football and the transfer portal, with Syracuse losing 6 players and 4 in so far? He also notes, is Gary Gate bringing Syracuse lacrosse back to prominence? Maybe, maybe not. And a prediction from Bruce, who says Syracuse basketball will return to the top 25 in college basketball and will make the NCAA tournament as a 6 or better seed. How about that? From Sandra, who says, my first choice would be the news that Jerry McNamara took the head coaching job for Siena. Yeah, we noted that in kind of the others receiving votes category. And one reason it didn't make my list is I guess I was expecting it. Once Adrian Autry got the Syracuse head coaching job, I expected Jerry to leave. Maybe not right away, but after one season, doesn't completely stun me. He wants to be a head coach. He deserves the shot to be a head coach. I think he's going to be a great head coach, by the way, and it just wasn't going to be here. Maybe he'll circle back down the road someday. Who knows? But for now, I'm happy for Jerry that he gets an opportunity at Siena, and I guess I've just been expecting it for so long that it didn't resonate as much as maybe I thought it would. Tampa Ron says Fran Brown in recruiting, Eddie Lampkin ending up in Syracuse amid the speculation about his social media deletion. Man, what a story that was. 2 top recruits bailing on women's lacrosse. A lot of you mentioned women's lacrosse. That has stuck with you and what's happening with that program. That's interesting. From a prediction from Tampa Ron, Eddie Lampkin will dominate in the early season. Dude's a beast, and unlike any center that Syracuse has had in quite a while. I want to welcome our new Syracuse Sports Insider, Che, who says a few here. Number 1, Fran Brown's electric offseason. Number 2, Syracuse lacrosse in a healthy place once again. And number 3, Syracuse basketball's never-ending drama, the lackluster year, Judah spat with the media, Eddie Lampkin, the 44 saga. We mentioned Benny Williams getting dismissed, and on it goes, right? And yet they end up at 20 wins, and it feels like Adrian Autry has stabilized the ship. So somewhat, but big expectations to come. His prediction, Syracuse actually loses, this is football now, to Georgia Tech in week 2, but disappointment is short-lived, ends up being a blessing in disguise as they learn from it and climb to beat Miami for an 8 or 9 win season. A few more from our Syracuse Sports Insiders here, including Brian, who says, I have one that probably won't make the list, but it intrigues me. Why can't women's lacrosse get over the hump against Boston College? In short, Brian, I think that is coaching. I just think that Boston College has a much more experienced staff. Acacia Walker-Weinstein's been there 12 years. Her assistant, Jen Kemp's been there 17 years. Kayla Trainor's only been the head coach for 3. Her assistants have less than 10 years of experience. One assistant only 1 year on the staff. So I just think that BC staff has been there, done that, and seen every scenario that can come at them in Syracuse. And their coaching staff still learning a lot about that. From Vern, my main man, Vern. I think the most interesting and intriguing story is, will Fran Brown's recruiting success translate to wins on the field in the fall? And Arvin's going to take us home. Kion Anthony picks Syracuse fans relax. Red's going to be fine leading this program. Or Kion Anthony picks another school and we're all in full panic mode. Yes, the decision of young Kion Anthony is certainly going to be, no matter what he decides, one of the bigger stories of the second half of 2024. Thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders for their awesome insight as always. Thanks to you for listening, watching the program. Just a reminder to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, wherever you get your pods so you don't miss an episode of Syracuse Sports. If you missed our conversation earlier this week with Brian Fonseca of NJ.com, the Rutgers fans flooded the comments on that one. Check out the YouTube comments of that podcast. But Syracuse and Rutgers, top of the heap right now when it comes to the class of 2025 and the number of commitments that each school has. So we had a great conversation about that. Mike Tirico was a recent guest on the pod. So if you missed it, just check out Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube or subscribe to Syracuse Sports, and you won't miss a thing. Our featured music guest today, the Moms and the Soup Song. You're going to hear that in its entirety at the end of the podcast. And please send me your music. If you are a not just a local musician, I had local music in mind, but a musician that's watching and listening to this show out there in the Syracuse Sports pod community, we would love to feature your original music on this podcast. Now, again, your original music. We can't play Beyonce on the show. We can't play the Rolling Stones on the show. We can't play Billie Eilish on the show. It has to be your original music or a band you're in. Details are in the show notes on how you can get in touch with me. Let's make it happen. We'd love to feature your original music on this podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. My name is Brent Axe. We'll catch you next time here on Syracuse Sports.
I am an ancient soul. I see that things don't change. It all stays cyclical. I ain't the same optimist after a million trips around the sun. Eat soup and feel good, and it worked much better than I thought it would. Paint a picture and paint it brown, sniffing glue in a one-horse town. I am required to bear this bad news to you. I admit I regret to inform you of this, but you won't be missed by the stars, the sun or the moon. But eat soup and feel good, and it works much better than I thought it would. Paint a picture and paint it brown, but out of glue in a one-horse town. I am an ancient soul, but everything's gone strange. It's turned atypical. I'll stay the same cynicist to see all of this unfold. It should come as no surprise. The ending reign of mankind. Born a lamb, but bred to feast. Proudly betrayed his fellow sheep. Eat soup and I feel good. And it works much better than I thought it would. Paint a picture and paint it brown. Get a grip and come I am inspired to bear this great news to you. I'm elated to relate the thought that all your follies will be